Uh, and we're going to need to take a small detour into something called statistical power, as I may have mentioned earlier. And we'll discuss a visual intuition of what it means to have found some real effect in some context, because effects in social science are, of course, always bound to different contexts. So we have sort of two options. There is absolutely no trace of this effect in this context, or there is some form of this effect in this context. And if the effect is not there, we have two options for behavior. So we can say that there is no effect, nothing to see here, or we can say that there is an effect actually that can be seen here. And so these are called correct negatives. So if we say that there's no effect and there actually is no effect, and if there is no effect and we say there is an effect, then we're doing a false positive. And if there is an effect in this context, and then we also have two options. We can say that there is no effect, or we can say that there is an effect. And so here we would be committing a false negative inference, and here we would be committing a correct positive inference. And remember that this yes and now, this is always unknown to us in a way. So we have no perfect knowledge of whether this which one is the case, but we have evidence that points us to either direction. And in both of these cases, we reject the null hypothesis. So if there is no effect and we say there is an effect, then we reject the null hypothesis, and if we reject the null hypothesis when there actually is an effect, then we're also doing that. So the probability of correct positives is this 80% that we've discussed earlier, and so this is called statistical power. And so if the real effect exists, then we either have we have the statistical power that comes from the test that we're doing, or we have the probability of making a false negative statement. And so here we have the same number. So this alpha is the p-value threshold that's usually set at 0.05 completely arbitrarily. And here's an interesting short video from Daniel Larkins, who has really made some good progress in teaching the elementary forms of these methods, the statistical methods used in psychological and social sciences to people who are not that into statistics. And these traditional methods, they don't really work for fact-tailed domains or complexity, or under complexity, as we'll discuss later in this course. But it's a very nice course to get the very basics of the traditional statistical methods, and to understand what people mean when they talk about these methods. And we don't want to make any definitive clauses about whether social scientists should be using these methods at all, but I think it's useful if everyone would know what they're about. But the point is that if you do anything with power analysis, it's also quite a grim statement that anything you do is an improvement over the current practice. And here is a book that actually gives you the very strong foundations for all of this. It's called Statistical Inference of Severe Testing, How to Get Beyond the Statistics Walls. And it's written by a philosopher of science, and it's one of the authorities on this topic. So if you have a philosophical bent, then it might also be easier to read. But it is quite a challenging read if you are not that much into, if you have difficulty reading philosophical papers. So will a study show an effect if an effect exists? We have the power, the statistical power that set the convention, and we should think about this. We should also think about whether we want to use PF 0.05 or something more sensible in our context. But here's the thing that if you don't randomize, because randomization was originally Ronald Fisher's way of making these methods work. If you don't randomize in social science, because everything tends to correlate with everything just a tiny bit, because most things are connected in some way, and statistics assumes that these things are not connected. It is a fact that these big samples, if you collect a lot of people, you will always get statistically significant results, even if the question you're asking from the statistical analysis is actually not sensible. And we saw this in video, maybe it was video 4 of this series, where we had a spreadsheet and we did the fake correlation on the spreadsheet, randomizing two variables. And Justify Your Alpha is a famous paper. If you Google it, it has a lot of researchers who wanted to put out the point that you should actually make these informed decisions about which thresholds for detection you might want to use. And there's also a course, if you Google Richard McElrath, Statistical Rethinking, which gives the intuitions about Bayesian analysis in a very entertaining way. And so that approach is quite different from these thresholded analysis, because it forces you to look at the whole distribution. You might want to check it out. But to leave you off in this video, something that's one of the most important points about statistical power is that the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. So if you don't find an effect, that doesn't automatically mean that you have found evidence for the non-existence of that effect. And so there's this very famous and excellent book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb called The Black Swan, which I thoroughly recommend reading many times. And much of that book is about this